9:30. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning to come and visit with, or meet with us, I guess. My name is Nicole Mace. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association. And before we get into a discussion, I would love for everybody to do some introductions. But before I do that, I think I'd like to just provide a little bit of context for why this group of folks up here has made the trip down to Brattleboro this morning. So when Act 46 was passed, signed into law last year in June, the School Boards Association, the Superintendents Association, Principals Association, and the Agency of Education held a series of consultancies with over 30 supervisory unions in the state to try to help people start to get some questions answered, think through what their options might be. It was very early on in the process, and in particular, some of the more complicated parts of the state, the questions hadn't even really surfaced yet at that point because people hadn't started to really dig into what Act 46 meant for them and how the different pieces of legislation that have passed over the years, Act 153, 156, and 46 intersected. So it was our best attempt to try to get folks some answers, to try to get all of us in the room to hear what each other's thinking was about the answers to some of these questions. And it really was, I think, the kickoff of a year of a tremendous amount of activity around the state. So since last June, we've seen how many merger votes? Well, so if you can see, so the map here illustrates the successful mergers are in orange since June 10.
But there also are these two which are in their reconsideration period, one of which, even if nothing is done, will be a mud. So there is
So there's an additional potential for two more, depending on what happens during the reconsideration period. The folks in blue are places that have a formal study committee, so where all the member districts have voted to study the potential for creating a unified district. The purple are places that are going to be, they've recently had their articles approved by the State Board of Education, and they will be voted on in June. And so while we have seen a lot of activity, certainly a lot of progress in places that have held votes, we also know that in other parts of the state the conversations are taking a little bit longer because the complexities are different or the issues are different. And so we made a commitment this spring that rather than have another series of consultancies in Montpelier where folks had to give up the better part of their days to come to us, that we would sort of take it on the road and do some outreach in different parts of the state and offer the opportunity to come together and ask questions, run through some thinking that you're doing in an effort to continue to support the important conversations that are happening in your region. So that's really why we're here today. This is your opportunity to get some questions resolved. I do want to say that we may not be able to provide you with an immediate answer. Some of these questions have angles that need to be thought through, and so, you know, my bias is always to let me understand what the situation is, ask some questions, talk with folks, and then we can respond. And those of us up here have spent the last 11, 12 months answering a lot of questions, so it's also very possible that we'll be able to quickly answer definitely the more straightforward. But really it's an opportunity for folks in this room to have a dialogue about where you're at and how we can best support you in moving forward. So that's what I would like to say, and I'll kick it off to my colleagues.
Hi, I'm Jeff Francis. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association.
I'm Frank Rucker, the Business Administrator, Wyndham Southeast.
Maybe Wall, Dummerston.
Erin Kachuk Guilford, School Board.
Christina Naylor, Dummerston School Board.
Dave Scholes, Brattleboro. Mark Truhan, Brattleboro.
Oh, Sean Murphy, Guilford. Thank you.
Marilyn McQuaid, Vernon.
Jody Normandeau, Dummerston Public.
Mike Ebert, I'm the chair of the Vernon School Board, and I also represent Vernon and Guilford in the legislature. Thank you for coming down. Unfortunately, I think the questions that I have are not going to be suitable for you to answer. They're more dealing with the articles and some of the legalities of the articles. I've been spending the last 7 or 8 days with attorneys, so there are numerous questions which I think would be better posed to the study committee.
I'm Ricky Davidson. I'm a BUHS high school board member, and I'm also on the Act 46 study committee.
I'm Howard Weiss Tisman, Vermont Public Radio.
Steve Dale, I'm a consultant that's been helping Wyndham Central, but obviously there's so many connections across all the different supervisory units that it's important to get a sense of what's happening across the region.
I'm Steve Sanborn. I'm a consultant as well, and I'm working with 5, and we'll be starting another school district soon, so in different parts of the state. So I've worked in actually all 4 corners of the state.
I'm Chris Mays from the Brattleboro Reformer.
I'm Donna Russo Savage. I am with the Agency of Education. My title is Principal Assistant to the Secretary for School Governance. What it means is that I'm the point person to answer questions for Act 46. And for those of you who don't know me or know my background, is I was the nonpartisan attorney who staffed the legislative committees for the previous 9 years was with the education committees. So I'm actually the person who worked with the legislators on Act 153, 156, 46, worked with all sides of those questions, the people who loved it, the people who wanted to do something different, the people who didn't want to do anything. As nonpartisan attorney, I was advising all of them and trying to create whatever the legislature decided it wanted to create ultimately. And I will say that nonpartisan spirit definitely continues over into my current job. My job is to be supportive of whatever it is the local communities want to do. I have no agenda. I have not been told to follow any agenda. I'm just here to try to answer questions and to clarify things when I'm able to clarify them. And actually, I will just say, it was something we were discussing earlier. It's very easy when any of us talk to someone and then that conversation is then translated to someone else and that conversation is translated to someone else. And I've heard all sorts of things that I have said reported back to me, or that the secretary has said reported back to us, that we never said anything remotely like that. And I'm not saying that there's any ill intent at all. It's just it's a very natural thing that when conversations get repeated through a number of people that it changes. So I hope that you, as I am coming to this as a nonpartisan person trying to be helpful, I hope that you will accept that I didn't necessarily say something that someone has sworn that I've said.
And I'm Nikki South. I'm the Act 46 Implementation Project Director. I'm thrilled to put faces to the names of so many of you that I've been working with throughout this process. Pleased that we could be here today.
And we have one other colleague who will be coming, but he had a child to attend to this morning, so we're not sure when he's going to arrive.
And we did get word not too long ago that Alice Laughlin, who's the chair of the Act 46 Study Committee, is going to be unable to join us. She had a family emergency, so unfortunately Alice won't be joining us. But I think I'll turn it over to, I don't know if Frank or Amy want to take the lead, at least in terms of letting us all understand better where you're at and the process you've gone through, and what are the outstanding issues at this point.
Okay, so I'd be glad to do a sort of, it is a jump in at the last minute, and if any of the other study committee members want to intercede, that's fine, interrupt, that's fine. And just so you know, Amy, Christine, Mark, and Ricky, those are our study committee members. So
I am also.
And you're a
Yes.
You're a member as well. Okay.
Me too.
Are you alternates? Must be all. Okay. That's, they have it.
Which means we are.
So I've made a copy of an overview, an Act 46 project overview that's on our website. It's something that the study committee has worked on regularly, contributed, edited pretty much every meeting. And it's getting ready if we do proceed with a report to the state board, and then the logical result from that, which is a public information campaign. It's intended to help illustrate the issues that are before the communities, around governance to address. So what I wanted to recap in terms of my sense of open issues, and this is where I'll defer to the study committee real quick if you have other points of view, but three main points of interest that would be interesting to get your perspective and experience on. I'll just list the three, and then we can talk about more in detail. One is the format of the vote. If we do go forward with a report to the state board, and the state board comes back and says you're okay, I think the committee's about to address whether or not it's an all or nothing type of vote, meaning an accelerated format, and if all five towns say yes, we move forward, but if any one town says no, then this system stops. That's one format that's being considered, and then the alternative, of course, is that it allows for a contingency, so that if any one or two or any of the advisory towns, it's advisable, right? Advisable towns, if any of them decline, but there's still the core, shall we go in that direction? So the So the nature of the discussion is, rationale for either of those paths, and your experience and reflection on that. And we certainly have a fair amount of discussion internally that maybe we'll revisit. So that was one significant issue that needs to be addressed. The second is a frequent sentiment shared with the study committee from the public and from some members of the study committee is why don't we slow this process down and look at our alternatives as opposed to vote in June. So I'd love to spend a little time on slide 13 when we get into the more detailed nature of that question. But again, our system. We're 5 towns. We have Vernon with the only unique governance structure around choice versus union membership.
I'm sorry, I was just checking with Brad about something. Could you just back up with that last thought?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Number 2 is.
I heard about the slowdown, but is
yeah.
that last little bit of it?
Vernon's unique.
Yeah, Vernon is the only unique governance structure in terms of choice, but we are configured differently from school to school in that we have K-6, we have K-8, and then we have the Union High School. So when we get into the details of that, we have a slide. I'd love to hear your input, and I assume the committee would be interested in the question. What if we slow down? What are the paths? And what have other communities done in that struggle? So the third was another significant topic that we've heard a lot from our communities as we've gone around is the local input into governance as we move into a fully implemented either Act 153, Act 156, or a 46 merger. I'm assuming this is very common across the state, where concern about the local town meeting being quite different with a merged system versus where we are today. And again, to what extent does the general public have access to the governing board and representation from a local perspective, from a local individual school perspective. And again, this study committee's done a great deal on local leadership councils, and I think, again, it's an area where we haven't finished the conversation at the committee level, and it seems to me it would be helpful to hear your experience with how communities have addressed that. So those are three topics that I thought might be useful in the absence of our chair. Any others that we want to add to that, or do you want to start with that? We have, is it until 11:30, is that right? 11? Okay, so we have a little more than an hour. Committee, you want to start with that, or do you have another issue you want to
No,
bring up?
if I'm Mark Truhan, Brattleboro Town School Board, I think anything else added onto this plate is going to be too much for today. But I would like to emphasize the second item that Frank brought up. Why the rush? Why the rush to judgment on this subject?
Can I put a little context to that? So if you go to your slide 13, and this is the slide that's ongoing. Yeah, I just wrote down the page numbers there. So this is the PowerPoint that's on the website. And I do have several other copies if folks would like. I can just pass them around. So the issue around, well, what are our choices under any of the acts, 153, 156, and Act 46. So lower right, I penciled in the slide numbers, slide 13, and just to give our group here a little context, we have looked at the self-study option. We've looked at a number of configurations within our Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, and most of these are as a result of either community members saying, well, would you consider this, or of course our own sense of, well, this might be a logical subgrouping. If we weren't going to do a region-wide merge, maybe we would look at these different scenarios. And on I don't know if you would say fortunately or unfortunately, but from the committee's point of view and a subcommittee that did the more detailed work, it appears there are not a lot of options available unless we wanted to change how we operate, to what extent we're a union member or not a union member, to what extent do we operate grade 7 and 8 or not. If we wanted to redefine who we are, then of course there are a number of options. But initially, there's been interest from some folks in not redefining our school governance structures. So there's the context of what we've analyzed. And
can you identify who those folks are? Because I haven't heard from a lot of them. The study committee.
Yeah.
Okay. How about boards in general?
So does anyone want to jump in on that?
Or community members. I've had a lot of contact with community members, fellow representatives, state representatives from this district, and I don't hear what you just said. I'm hearing maybe we should look at more alternatives and separations and what we're doing. One of them being letting the schools know that if Guilford wanted to have an operating pre-K to 6 and then do school choice 7 to 12, they could vote to do that. That's one of the possibilities. The secretary herself, back in December, mentioned that Vernon could withdraw from the union and establish their alternative district because we're isolated geographically and we have no one who is a like district immediately in our area. And the other is that we could also withdraw from the union and merge with like districts, of which there are 5 within 40 miles. So there are other options. So the statement that we don't have options is not totally clear, and it's not, I don't think it's representative of the numerous people that are calling and emailing me. So I just wanted to put a counter point out there.
I think this option assumed that we were trying to all proceed together and remain a big unit. I think the options that you're talking about are more smaller pieces breaking off. So this was an attempt to look at what we could do as an entire body together.
Right, and then that leads to the structure of the question on the ballot, the either-or option.
We aren't there yet.
So I'm wondering whether it makes sense to go through the questions one by one, just so we make sure that we get to all of them. So the first one was, and then, so we'll cover slow the process down, why now, when we get to the second question and what the alternatives might be. But the first question you put out there was the format of the vote, so the pros and cons of pursuing everyone is a necessary district, so that if anyone says no, nothing moves forward. The group needs to sort of regroup and decide what to do next, versus identifying one or more districts as advisable. Is that basically the frame of that question?
I think so.
Okay. Is there any other information that the study committee members want to share with us before we respond, or get some other?
I have like an add-on to that question, and that would be, this comes from my study committee members that I'm representing. And it has to do with more of the voting piece. At-large candidates must be from necessary districts, and I guess there was just, we wanted to know if that is true or not.
We can talk about, why don't we include that as a fourth thing, because how you form your board for your whatever district you might form, there are different ways of doing so.
Okay, great. I think that would be
okay.
Well, and maybe related to that, one of the things that I am hearing a lot of in relation to if and when this ever goes to a vote to the public, that when it does so at that same election, you also have to elect the new board members for this new board.
Right.
And that seems messy is sort of an understatement. And doing that.
Unfortunately, that's been the law for 50 years, and that's the way that all of the union school districts
Right,
are formed.
but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or makes sense. Just because it's the law doesn't necessarily mean it's right or makes sense.
That's absolutely true, but the thing is, the only way that you can change that is if you convince your legislator to bring something before the legislature, and the legislature changes the law, which totally can happen.
Yeah.
It's just that given the laws that you currently have, those two things happen on the same day.
And it's the process that was used for the creation of your union high school district. It's the same process that's been on the books for a long time.
And it totally
I'm not saying it's not law. I'm just saying that it's. I think
confusing.
that I think what's going to end up it's confusing, but I think what's going to end up happening too is that this ever does go to a vote, you're not going to have anybody running for the board. You're going to have a union district and nobody running for the board.
That hasn't been the case in any of the other SUs that have voted.
Yeah, most of the people I've spoken to, nobody's at this point that I've heard from is willing to step up to do this.
Well, I am.
Okay, you're the first I've heard from. You're the first I've heard from, Sean.
These individuals here came out from Montpelier, and I think they have extremely valuable information to give us, and I think we ought to give them a chance to speak for an hour.
So do you want to take the?
I just have one. I have a nail from Dummerston. It's also the messiness of an accelerated versus the mud, and having voters understand, well, what does this mean? How do we run all those financial models, those board governing models, so people understand what a no and a yes vote means. And very concerning to me what is yes, does no mean no, or does it mean maybe? So.
Right.
I'd like to start with just a couple of things. Is that people are talking about accelerated, and I think that when you're saying accelerated, you might be meaning accelerated, but I think that you're also possibly talking about the bigger concept of a unified union school district, and that can happen. That gets to your second question about slowing down. That can happen in the second phase as a red. And the incentives aren't nearly the same for a red as they are for an accelerated. The accelerated mergers, really frankly, we're surprised that as many happened as happened. When I was at the legislature when this was being debated, I was staffing it, and it was really expected that there would just be a couple of places that had really simple structures, that had long histories of working together, and that they would kind of zoom into this situation and provide a model for other places to see how things are done. The fact that there are as many as there are was a little bit surprising. And it definitely, the way the law is structured is to allow the same kinds of structures to be created, but to be created in a more thoughtful way in those places where it's a more difficult conversation.
Just a point of numeric clarification, Mark Truhan, again, you had mentioned 12 that signed on, 2 are possible, out of a total of how many? 12 is a lot if you've got 13, 12 is a drop in the bucket if you've got 1,000, so.
Every single one that had, well, except for these two, every single, since Act 46 was enacted, every single vote has been successful with the exception of Addison Rutland, which is still in its reconsideration phase. There was one town that voted against it, Orwell, and so I think it's May 12th. That will expire, but until May 12th, the voters of Orwell could petition to have a revote, so that's a possibility. And just one second. And then the other one that is not exactly what they presented, Memorial North did look for an accelerated merger. 2 of the districts have voted no, and unless they also vote, this will become a MUD. So this will actually be a merged district, but it will be not an accelerated merged district.
12 out of 46.
12 out of 46 possible.
Well, there's 46 supervisory
unions.
12 out of 46 supervisory unions.
Yes.
But
Does it sound like a low number?
Well, except for the fact, if you remember what an accelerated merger is, an accelerated merger is only the districts that are in a supervisory union, and every single one agreeing to operate and tuition in exactly the same way. So when you bring it down to that number, it becomes a much smaller number because it becomes places like Addison Central, where everyone operates their own elementary school and feeds into the Union High School. So no one changes what they do. Whereas if you go to Orleans Southwest, everybody would have to change what they do in order to make it happen. So the number 46 is a little bit
misleading.
Misleading, exactly, because there were only a certain number that it really would.
How many school districts in the state of Vermont? I heard 240, is it?
Now we're down to
267, something like that.
Well, but after all this, now we're down below 240, I believe.
Well, yeah, I haven't done that count yet, you're right.
Yeah, over 50 school districts have said yes. We had 277 at the start. So, I want to get back to the all or nothing discussion and whether or not what the implications are for having everyone listed as necessary versus, and I think what the question that you raised is having it be a sort of, if certain districts say no, then this alternative structure is created, a MUD or a layered, really, I think would be your 2 options.
Would that be helpful for Donna to just run through what she sees as the options for this?
I was thinking actually that goes quite well with the slowdown also, to lay out what the various options are. Now, one of the options is exactly as Representative Hebert was saying, is that you go through that initial process to dissolve your Union High School, and then, or for some members to withdraw from it. And then the question is a very different question. So I'm not going to go into that first because that isn't a common structure, but that certainly is a possibility. And then that raises limitless possibilities depending upon who does what. The first of the accelerated, and I think that as a practical matter, and I can't spell, is that really right? As a practical matter, your vote would have to be in June, but it also means you have to be before the State Board event by its May meeting, which at this point we're getting pretty close, and it would be pretty difficult to get everything ready for that to happen. The kinds of incentives that are available are exactly the same, with one exception, as what is in what we're calling phase 2. Phase 2 are the reds, and then the 3 kinds of red variations: the side-by-sides, what we're calling layered, which is a union elementary school, and the third, which are the modified unified union school districts. All of these have a much longer time frame. The vote doesn't have to occur for another year. With the accelerated, not only does the vote have to occur by the end of this June, but also the new district has to be operational within a year. With all of these, the vote is not until July of 2017, and it doesn't have to be operational until July of 2019. So it gives you more time to go through the process, both to be discussing things and to be getting yourself to the place where you are operational as whatever unit you end up being. The third, which is kind of similar to an accelerated and a red, actually it's more similar to a red, are the conventional mergers, what we're calling conventional mergers. And this was in Act 46, Section 7. This has fewer requirements and even more relaxed time frame. There's no date by which the vote has to occur with these, as long as it is operational by July 1 of 2019. And the incentives are slightly different. In this particular case, the only thing that's different with these 4 types from an accelerated merger is the 1 year of tax incentives. With this, there are 5 years of tax incentives starting with 10 cents and then working down. With these, there are 4 years starting with 8. But in every other way, the $150,000 transitional money, the ability to turn any small school grants you have into permanent merger support grants, and the ability to keep under the new way that they're going to be calculated, but to be able to keep phantom pupils, or the ability to calculate so that you have phantom pupils. That's available here. It's just the one difference between this, which has a much more relaxed time frame, and this is the 10 cents in the first year. The one difference here from the conventional from these is that it does not have the $150,000 transitional grant. And I have heard in places where, I have heard talking to the legislature about that $150,000 is really important regardless of when you do it, because there are things that need to be changed. And I have heard talk about talking to the legislature as we go through the process, reconsidering whether that would be something that could potentially be available to these later mergers as well. All of these can go outside of SU boundaries. In your particular situation, it's a little bit more difficult unless somebody's willing to change, because you're all going into the union high school, but none of these require you to stay within supervisory union boundaries, so you can come up with something different.
And just to be, the conventional is the preferred. You're able to form a district that serves at least 900 students.
900,
single
and it
district.
is it's a unified union school district, so it serves pre-K through 12. And it should be small enough large enough and capable enough to be its own supervisory district, so it wouldn't be part of the supervisory union. As far as numbers are concerned, and I see on that page 13 there are some numbers being discussed, numbers really don't play a part in this part. Reds can either be 4 districts or 1250 ABM. So, and the only time numbers come into play at all are if you're looking for some kind of an incentive. The way they might come into play later on is if one of those options I saw was to do nothing and just kind of have a self-study and figure out how you could work together better. the state board, when it's reviewing that, is going to be keeping in the back of its mind various things that the legislature said in Act 46 about how the goals are best supported. One of those things is that if you're a supervisory union, you have an 1,100 ADM. So that's going to be something that the state board is going to be considering. But part of the reason that Act 46 was drafted the way that it was, so that there are options that fit the locality rather than trying to make the options fit the locality, is that there are going to be places where the ADM, it's just not possible to do that. And so it really, except for in this particular case, and if that is going to be one of the ways that you're going to form, if you don't have 4 districts, but you have 1250, those are the only 2 places where it's an absolute requirement that you have a certain number. Otherwise, it isn't a requirement. And I'm kind of ignoring the accelerated because I'm assuming that it's a little too rapid.
So I would say there are some places that have sort of said we're going to put this, everybody listed as necessary under the accelerated vote because that's the only way we're eligible for the accelerated incentives. And we want to put that question to our voters. And then if it fails in a single district, then we'll have to sort of come back together and regroup and see about one of these other options. And what we saw in Addison Rutland, that's what they did. Everyone was necessary. Large support in most of the communities. One community defeated it. It will not move forward. And once the reconsideration period is over, if they haven't decided to have another vote, then that group really does go back to the drawing table and figure out what to do next. And we've had some boards and board members that feel so strongly about the benefits of the proposal that they're putting to the voters that they're saying, we're just going to bring it back. And there are some places where the complexity of the operating structures or the differences in philosophies are such that that may be a very important signal to the group to say, we need to come back and look at one of these other alternative structures. But I think, I think one of the other issues to pay attention to is the one that you identified as confusion in terms of articles that say, if everybody, if 1 or 2 districts says no, then we're going to create this modified unified union school district, and that's going to look this way. We know that 2 places in the state of Vermont have created those MUD structures, and
there's one more in the June vote that's
and there's
structured
one
that
more
way as
that's
well.
potentially so. So it seems as though that hasn't necessarily been a barrier to voters supporting it in communities, but it's certainly one of those things where after the vote, we get a lot of calls like, okay, so we created this MUD, how does that work? It's not as straightforward as okay, we're all.
Those who have alternatively warned a MUD have been fairly detailed in their articles of agreement about the relationship between the non-member district to the rest of the MUD. So that's something that you would want to be considering is what sort of details do you want to put in the articles to make sure everyone understands the nature of that alternative creation.
Yeah.
I have to say, it's concerning to me. I mean, it's my question is that it's put to the voters, the voter vote on it, and then say, what have we done? That's concerning to me as somebody who's thinking that, school board's putting this on the ballot.
I wouldn't say it's what have we done. The question is now how do we sort of operationalize this? And the answer is let's go back to the articles of agreement because you've talked about this and it's all spelled out.
And it's also something that you want.
The electorate, the general population will not know what is in those articles of agreement. They will not understand them. And I've had long conversations with the Secretary of State. He's very uncomfortable with this tiered system of voting, as is Ledge Council. They did say technically you can do it, but it is confusing to voters. And they mentioned the same thing you did. Voters, after it was done, said, what does this actually mean? So they would prefer a more direct, you're voting yes or no, and voting yes or no also gets us to the question I was going to ask Donna, the Orwell situation. Because they were all necessary, Orwell could reset the process. And I talked to the representative from Orwell. They're not saying we don't want, and she's also the chair of the study committee. They're not saying they don't want to move forward. What they're saying is they don't want to move forward with that particular model, but would entertain a couple of others, and they would like the additional year to see what their situations are. And I was glad you mentioned complexity, because speaking with St. Johnsbury, they looked at it very simply because it was a very uncomplex issue for them. It was a straightforward, we can do this, and it didn't change much of anything. And I think that's what is the dependence on whether this moves forward smoothly or not, is the complexity of your particular area.
I would say, to your point about whether or not the electorate is informed about what it is that they're voting on, you will have to do a public forum and an informational meeting for each one of your communities.
At least
and
one.
If you are going to alternatively warn a MUD, it's something that you should be paying attention to, so that the electorate does have the ability to understand the complexity of the warning.
And we've seen differences in the amount of public outreach that supervisory unions have done. Some of the study committees have had many public meetings and public information sessions. Others have had fewer. I think, especially as Nikki said, when it's going to be a complicated situation like a MUD, as a possibility, it definitely is important to do that.
Another problem.
One of the things that I wanted to say is thank you for coming down here. You have made things much clearer and more identifiable for me. As a member of the public who has been attending these meetings even before they set up the study committee meeting, the issue has been the rush to the accelerated. The issue has not really been, even though the study committee says they have looked at these alternatives, it has not really been looking at these alternatives. It has not been community friendly. I'm watching WSESU with Mr. Dale there before they've even set up the study committee. They're doing all the kinds of outreaches that they need to do. We have not had those community outreaches. From Dummerston, the people there have no clue what Act 46 is all about. We could have a forum before this vote, but that's not going to do it before the June 28th vote. And it's very, very frustrating. And I'm representing a group of people who have been coming to these meetings that is very frustrated with the fact that we can't. A lot of us would like to. We have a wonderful supervisory union. We've had it for years. We work well together. We have shared so many things, but we want to stay the way we are, and we want to have the community, our school boards, our town meetings. We don't want to lose any of that. And I think the people, even in Brattleboro, the people have no idea what town meetings mean to the smaller communities.
So,
anybody in the cities, and they don't have any idea what it means to the communities. You lose that. You lose so much. It's not worth 10 cents, 8 cents, or whatever it is to lose that.
I've got several things that come
good.
about that. One is that even the tax incentives themselves are not really incentives.
No.
They really are a way to bridge over to a new situation where everyone is coming together. So the thing that should be first and foremost on everyone's mind is what's best for the kids. Are we creating a structure that is better for the kids? Are we creating a structure that's more transparent to the populace? Those are the kinds of things. The tax incentives and the other things that are out there are supports to help with that, but they're not intended to be what the focus is. We should get to talk about non-merging districts and staying the same at some point. And Alex, go ahead.
Well, I think a lot of the issues that you raised are going to be addressed in the third question, which was local input into governance. So I don't want to if we get sort of sidetracked.
You've only got three questions from Frank. You haven't got any questions from anybody else here, and I kind of think you ought to deal with some other people too.
So our commitment was to meet with folks from the study committee to answer their questions to the extent we have time at the end to take additional questions. I think that's sort of the group's up to the group.
When you say that, are you talking individual study committee members or the study committee as a group?
I'm talking about the representatives from the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union Study Committee that responded to our invitation to answer questions. So did you have anything else you wanted to, before we get into non-merging districts? I realize I cut you off.
Is there,
I think that's probably.
One more
Actually, Amy's
comment
had a
about
question
the-
that she's been
okay.
trying to get out.
But this is specifically about the vote, which
That's
I
fine.
Well,
think she can move on.
minus two.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've struggled with is the wording of the vote, and I'm wondering, you know, I know Demerson has issues about the dual wording, and I'm wondering if we were to, is it possible to, you have the language, you know, and you allow the voter to say yay or nay, but under that, can you describe, you know, a no vote means this thing is gonna happen. A yes vote means X is gonna happen, just to be descriptive, to say, okay, if we offer an accelerated merger option question, you know, if any, you know, to have that clarity there?
On the ballot?
Yeah, on the ballot, is that possible? I mean, because I think that
I
might.
think it's in the nature of the way that it's warned, but, and you would want to be working with your attorney to make sure that it's warned in such a way that that's evident.
I think, Amy, that's exactly the thing I was thinking about, a little different slant on it. If somebody wants to vote for all 5 members merging and making a combined supervisory district, they would vote yes. But there's no way that you could say that your yes vote or your no vote means that this town, and this town are going to merge. You won't know which ones are going to approve it. That will be part of whatever the result is. And to me, there's no way you can clarify that or describe that effectively.
And also, if you do a no vote,
May I say one quick thing? The one way you would know is if, for example, only 1 or 2 districts were named advisable and all the rest were named necessary, then you would know that at the very least, if you're going forward with a MUD, it would at least have to have these that were named necessary. And excuse me, I didn't mean to cut you off.
well, on the ballot question, you know, some people may be voting no because they want to reset the process. They don't want to go into a mud. So there is no opportunity for that. This ballot does not have an exit ramp.
If it has a MUD involved in it.
Right, if it's written the way it is now, there is no exit ramp. You're going to vote, and if you vote no and your intention is to reset the process and look at other alternatives, you don't get that option. And that's where the secretary is not comfortable with that.
Unless you're a member of a necessary district, and a necessary district votes against it, then
Right,
the whole.
but the way it's
the
structured
whole
at this
thing-
particular moment in the Articles of Agreement, the only necessary district is Brattleboro. So everyone else is drawn in, even if they vote no.
I don't know if we haven't indicated necessary or advisable yet.
Well, that was the last thing that I received.
And we haven't
Since the
seen,
April 6th,
we were
right?
discussing that we haven't seen anything that.
Yeah,
There
I
are
mean,
different ways
it's
you
not-
can lay your articles out. You can make one contingent upon the other. You can have 2 articles.
Okay.
Or again, to address the question again, I've not seen one to address the question. You could have an article right now that's simply for accelerated periods done. And then if that doesn't happen, then you can go on and look at the other.
It's one of the other issues.
There's a lot of fun.
Excuse me, you could do accelerated if you could get everything done. And then if there was a no vote, then go back to the drawing board, and that drawing board might be a red with mud
Right.
as an alternative, or it might be, you know.
I'm not hearing a lot of people saying we're not interested in some sort of a restructuring or remerger, but they want the additional time. I mean, in the minutes, it quotes the secretary as Act 46 is the law of the land with little likelihood of repeal or change. I would agree that it's unlikely to be repealed, but presently there's 7 bills hanging on the wall that dramatically change it, and there is a lot of conversation that when we go back for the next session, there will be significant change. And many of us are cautioning that let's take that extra time to see what those changes are. I mean, if we rush into this process and we establish ourselves at some point that we're on this accelerated and we've completed our merger, and there's changes to the law, what do we then do? You know, there's so many unanswered questions. I think this rapid pace is ill-advised. And I think I'm not alone in that thought process within the supervisory union. But I have yet to hear a single person in the supervisory union come to me and say, hey, we don't want to be a member of the supervisory union. We don't like our neighbors. We want to separate. That's not what I heard. What we've heard is this process is destroying our supervisory union. People are fighting with each other, people are arguing, and it's not constructive. Can we slow it down and take that additional year to do something more positive? And I think that's the big concern with that two-tiered question. It does not give you the opportunity to take that extra time.
So that could be a transition to the second question, but I want to make sure that there aren't any outstanding issues based on the format of the vote from what Donna has shared or any of us.
I think there might be two things that I could respond to. One, and add to is that there have been, I think, at least two of the proposals that have come forward where every single district was named as advisable. And when there was a MUD alternative, there have been other situations where it's been one or two named as advisable. So there are different ways that there are different. It really depends on what it is you're looking for. And then there are those places that have made every single one necessary because of the message that they want to send, or the belief that, okay, if this doesn't work, then we'll go back to the drawing board.
So for our study committee that's looking at doing accelerated with the MUD, why would we go for MUD with all districts necessary?
You wouldn't be able
okay.
to.
No. Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay.
And then the second thing, just really quickly, and we will get into it in more detail if there's time, there are three basic models of board structure for the new district. One of them would be where everything is totally at large, where the people are not assigned to, you don't say Dummerston has to have X representatives and Brattleboro has, but really everyone, the choice of who are going to be the candidates and then the voting. And so it's a totally at large system. If you went with a totally at large system of board representation, in that particular case, the initial board cannot have anyone nominated from an advisable district. And the reason it makes sense, because that advisable district may vote no. And then you'd have a board member coming from a district that isn't part of the new. But in every other situation of board membership, where it's partially, where it's strictly proportional, or where it's kind of a hybrid of the two, that is, it's allowable.
If it's a candidate nominated from that
district, it can come from that district. And we can talk about that in more detail if we get to the board membership.
So just maybe one more thing on number one there, following up on Mike's point. Given that there is this recognition that Wyndham Southeast has functioned well as a supervisory union, and that what the study committee has looked at first and foremost, because of the timeline, is essentially merging the existing supervisory union, which obviously means that it's not looking at merging with outside or dissolving the Brattleboro union and opening up a scenario of a whole lot of different options. But the question for you is given a supervisory union like Wyndham Southeast, where you have had a fair amount of collaboration and a pretty well unified system, stability at the superintendent's office, and good, generally good results. So the question is, where is the rationale in other communities where you have this sort of cohesive and collaborative structure to say, well, let's not look at moving ahead as a supervisory union. Let's look at I think, as Mike said, one scenario is disband the union high school and look at a whole lot of other configurations. Has there been rationale that sort of flesh that out for the benefit of this group as we consider an accelerated or not?
Yeah, so I think by and large, supervisory unions that are have a union high school district where the elementary districts feed into that, and that have had that are not experiencing, a crisis of some form or another. With the exception of Washington Central, I believe everyone else has moved forward.
There are two SUs with union high schools that do not have a 706 study committee in place at the moment, or have had a successful vote.
And so I think the thinking has been, if we know we're going to end up Act 46 has a lot of flexibility built into it, but it's flexibility that was built into it in order to accommodate the fact that we have some supervisory unions that have as many operating structures as they have districts. The flexibility was not really designed for places that have a cohesive structure, that have a history of working together, and that really have the sort of the infrastructure for a pre-K-12 system already built. And so I think for folks that have those factors in place, the thinking is, if we're going to do this ultimately by 2019, why not go for it in the first year where the tax rate reductions are highest, and where we can, as we sit together and we talk about the benefits in terms of students, when we look at, you've said the study committee has identified a lack of equity across the supervisory union. Why would we wait? If we know the process is available to us and we can move forward, that's what we're going to do. And again, that's not happened in every place, but I'd say the vast majority of supervisory unions like yours have agreed to move forward. And it's not to say that if the voters aren't on board, then you have 2 years to figure out what else to do.
You actually have more.
You have up to 3 years,
yeah,
really.
As long as you're operational by July 1, 19, you've got that as well.
Thanks.
May I ask you a question? Frank said it much more eloquently than I probably will, but he did mention a key word, which is collaboration. My thoughts on what Frank says, is there an option that if it's not broken, don't fix it? And can a mechanism somehow recognize the collaboration efforts of a current district that is working well?
And staying the same. You mean
Pretty much, yes.
All right, we get into the non-merging districts, and I have some handouts for some of these things. I wasn't expecting this number of people. We have 3 more meetings today, so I probably will only give out a couple, and you guys can make copies and pass them around. But non-merging districts that either decide they don't want to do anything, or districts that can't do anything, or districts that go forward and have an unsuccessful vote. So districts that are looking at themselves and saying, you know what, we're not going to have merged into anything by July 1, 2019.
Yeah.
They are required, each district is required to take a look at itself, to talk with its neighbors about ways to be more collaborative, and then either on its own as a district or in connection with other districts, present some kind of a proposal to the State Board of Education and say, this is what we think should happen. We have no way of predicting what the State Board of Education is going to do. We don't even know who's going to be on the State Board of Education in a year when 2 of the board members leave. We don't know with a new governor if there's going to be a new secretary, so we don't know if what that new secretary might or might not suggest to the new state board. So we have no way of being able to look into a crystal ball and predict whether anything is going to happen. But there are clues in Act 46 and elsewhere about some of the things that, at least in Act 46, they're being told to look at. And there is something on the Act 46 webpage which I've copied off, that does talk about some of those things. About would it be possible to merge? Is it that it's impossible? Is it the best way to proceed for your students to continue to do things the same way? How can you show that, and why? How can you show that it is not better than merging? So you would have to convince them that what you're doing is the best that you can do for students. And like I said, I have no way of knowing what they would say.
Can I just add one little thing to this? I hear the 10 cents 862 being thrown around. It's great tax savings. Is it true, though, is it not true that the tax is actually coming from the Vermonters that are trying to save the money? We're not getting manna from heaven. This is going to be money out of a different pocket. Is that correct?
So
we're still going to be paying the same amount of money. It's just going to be allocated differently.
I'm not quite, I thought I knew where you're going then with the last.
Okay, well, where I'm going is that somebody's got to cover the cost of that 10 cent savings. That's where you thought I was going to go?
Yes,
Good for
yes,
you.
because basically what happened on a very simplistic world, statewide funding system. Oh, by the way, I'm Brad James, WSESU Education. I apologize for being late. The sun was a little slow getting ready for school this morning. So it's a statewide funding system. What any single district does affects everybody else. if you have one of these mergers occurring, and I'll just use a simple example, say you guys choose to merge, nobody else has done anything, then you get that 10-cent incentive. Therefore, you're bringing less money into the education fund, right? Because your tax has been lowered. The education fund, however, still has that same amount of money it needs. Therefore, the base rate has to go up for everybody. And I'm speaking in old terms now because people don't quite understand the concept of the yield yet. But the base rate needs to go up a little bit to account for it. So everybody, including you,
is going to pay more taxes.
All right. Now, the other side of the coin is that there are efficiencies that will probably be gained in quite a few of these districts.
Collaborations, perhaps?
No, efficiencies.
I think that's a subtlety that might be lost on some voters.
Efficiency?
Efficiencies versus a collaboration, and both the end result is pretty much the same.
There are things that you can do differently as a single school district than you can across districts in the supervisory.
Even if you collaborate.
Even if you're collaborating.
Okay, thank you.
Multiple employers, multiple contracts.
Multiple audits, multiple school board members to pay. There are a lot of.
Thank you.
Well, I was quite done. But part of the idea is that there are these efficiencies which will drive down the overall demand on the education fund over time. Not immediately. That's why they threw in those excess spending thresholds this first 2 years to kind of force it down to give this time to work. So again, we're early in the process. However, Chittenden East, Chittenden East. Yeah, not Chittenden. Yeah, Chittenden East. Yeah, no, thank you. Huntington area. Yeah, that one. They did a modified unified school district, one of the versions, but they've saved $300,000 to $400,000. They realized cost savings. I should say, a decrease in expenditures. Let me put it that way. In their first year of operation, there should be ongoing. Now, if you take that and multiply it by what you're seeing up there in the gold, it starts to add up to real money eventually. And so that's part of the idea is to drive down the demand on the ed fund, which in turn will drive down the demand to push the tax rate up.
I also want to reiterate that it should not be characterized or perceived as major tax savings for anybody. It is designed to provide a transition phase. When you think about merging 5, 6, 7 different tax rates into a single unified tax rate, you're going to have some winners and some losers. And this is really designed to make it even palatable for the losers to become part of a unified system. It's not a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow saying you're going to save a lot of money here. That's not what they were intended to do, and it's really important that folks understand that, because if you don't start to realize efficiencies, then you're facing a cliff 4 or 5 years out.
Thank you for stating
So it's really a transition.
Yeah, first I want to thank you for mentioning the yield and the actual impact of the 10 cents. I think it's important. It is a concept that's being missed. Now, the 8 cents in the second year, there's great concern in the House about the number of people. It was surprising that so many people opted for the 10-cent option. And they're now anticipating the pressure on the yield may be upwards of $7 million next year. And that 8 cent, if people are looking at it as tax incentive, that's going to be even less valuable next year, as the 8 cents will not be 8 cents. But I do want to thank you for putting that on the table. But also I have a question as board chair from Vernon, and it's a question that we've asked several times, and as now a member of the study committee, I'll put it out there. Vernon has the unique situation of having the off-ramp on tax. What is the impact of this? Do we get both? How does that play out, and which one's of more value?
That's an excellent question, and I fell down on that because Frank asked me that question, and I have contacted the tax department, have not followed up on that because I want
Well, what I was going to suggest here is if you would bring that question back with you. I think there are other things more important to the broader group than that one question. I just want to make sure I didn't leave that unsaid. And you can get back to me and Frank at your convenience, but there are broader issues than that one particular problem to Vernon, so thank you.
So I think we've covered a little bit to slow the process down and look at alternatives. I hope folks are clear about the different timelines and the possibilities that exist to either sort of go all in on an accelerated and then revisit, or I think covered that pretty well. So are we okay to transition to the local input into governance? Or were there some outstanding issues on the first two questions?
Just one question that was asked at the board meeting. Who decides what's on the ballot? Because it's going to be warned by our local districts, I believe. So do we write the ballot? Does the study committee write the ballot? And can there be more than one question on the ballot?
That was a lot of questions.
It is.
So the statute spells out what's in the warning.
Right.
Okay.
So that's pretty, there's not a lot of, flexibility there.
Some warnings have more information in them than others, and it depends in part upon what's been in their articles and how they've structured their articles. And that has depended in large part upon the study committee working with their own attorney to craft those articles, and then the articles, some of the articles actually become the warning.
So, and the statute also says, and again, this is what's been on the books for a long time, that if you're listed as a necessary district, then the board has to warn what's been put out in the warning, what's been crafted with the study committee and the attorneys. If you're an advisable district, then the board can decide whether or not to warn it. But the voters can also petition the board to warn it if the board doesn't want to. And I am not aware of, nor do I think the statutes contemplate, the possibility of a board adding an additional question to that warning. I don't know that that's ever happened.
No, I think the only
There's
way,
variability
right.
district to district in terms of what
Oh,
people
certainly
vote on.
not. Certainly, there wouldn't be variability district to district. It would be a common warning that would be used with just the names changed.
Well, the question that has arisen is that well, I think you've answered my question. If we're advisable in Vernon, then we don't have to have a vote.
Unless the voters petition the board to
Right.
have it put on the ballot.
Secondly, what has come up was, could there be, Article 1, do you want to do this at all? And Article 2, will you vote to allow Vernon to disengage itself from the union?
You know,
I'm going to get a third legal opinion, so.
well, no,
and they all vary. It's great.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, well, and we were saying about there's so many questions that have come up, and especially with the MUDs, there's so many questions that have come up, because none of this has been done for a really long. It was a really long time ago that the union high schools were formed, and there are a lot of new issues that are arising just because, and people are trying to think ahead as much as they can, but sometimes it isn't until you're actually in the situation that you realize, gosh, there's nothing in here that helps us. So, I think that at one point, I might have actually even given the impression that that could be a possibility. I think that it would be very, very, I think it'd be very confusing to do so. So I think that even if it's potentially possible to do so, I don't know that it's the most advisable way to proceed. I think that it's much cleaner
You
to...
agree with the Secretary of State?
Well, okay. Good. I mean, I think that maybe it could happen, but I think that it would have to be worded so carefully, number one, and number two, it would be confusing. That it really makes more sense to do it in two phases.
Separate.
One is go through the statutes for Vernon deciding to become its own district, and then if that is successful or not, then go on to whatever the next step is.
And you're clear that once if Vernon decides to vote to withdraw from the union district, then everybody else needs to agree to it. So it's not just a matter of...
That's why I'm saying,
Right.
would that be on?
And also that even if Vernon votes to be its
Hopefully
own...
that goes away next year.
Even if Vernon votes to be its own district and everybody else agrees to it, it will be assigned to a supervisory union.
Yes.
Okay, so local input into governance. Some questions about how the annual school district meeting could work, and I know that there's been discussions across communities about what does this mean for our town meeting, how can we preserve a connection between town meeting and what's happening in the new unified school district, how will the public have access to the governing board, and then the work that you all have done on leadership councils. I would love you to start out with just the thinking of the study committee in terms of structures that could address concerns about local voice in the unified district's decision-making processes.
And I would say that, sorry, there is a quite complicated, lengthy description on the Act 46 webpage, but I also prepared some much simpler documents when the Secretary was testifying before the Senate Education Committee, one of which is just a one-page chart that kind of compares the three models, and which helps you get an idea of, oh, okay, well, this would answer the questions of our smaller communities, or this would answer the questions of whatever.
So that's for board membership.
Right. This is
right?
for board
Okay.
membership.
And I think also, so that's one, I think, issue that needs to be sort of just talked about. And also, I believe your articles address local councils, or school-based councils. So I'd like to know just a little bit more about that.
So our slide 22, if you want to take a quick look at our summary of Article 11 and 12, is well, where we're at this point. And again, this is a discussion in progress being developed at each of our meetings. So it is this formation of a local advocacy leadership council, and it's organized by the chair of the unified system, and then those representatives you see from the local district, which includes parents, students, and then there's a fair amount of detail about how it will operate. I don't know, has anyone on the committee sat on that development group? Want to speak to it? Ricky, anything?
I wasn't.
Okay. We do have more detail in the actual article itself, but the concept is to create a structure that is familiar and comfortable to parents and students, to community members, addresses issues of access to the facility. I think we do address that as an administrative procedure, that make sure folks are comfortable if they've been using the gym for a community rec area for years, that those sort of things will continue. And most importantly, concerns about education and influence on curriculum and quality of education. This is intended to create that community engagement. What it doesn't necessarily do, and I think it would be interesting to hear your experience, is replicate a town meeting event around a school budget vote. And I don't think that was central to this. This is addressing that, but also the educational ongoing development, oversight, and so on. But maybe if you have some comments, how the town meeting interface also has been addressed in some of our other mergers that have gone forward.
Do you want to take this? Okay, so I'm not aware of any articles that specifically address what will happen between the new district and town meeting. Have you seen any? Yeah. So, but I have had a number of discussions with folks about the need to talk about the appropriateness of having the union school board member present at town meeting to provide a report, much like your legislators provide a report, so it's an opportunity for a representative of the union district to come and be present at town meeting in a formal way, recognizing that there's not going to be action taken at that meeting, but it's an opportunity for folks to understand what's happening at the district level, understand the opportunities for weighing in either on the budget or other issues that the union board is making decisions on. And I think that will go a long way to alleviate some concern about members of our town are going to have no idea what this board is up to. So that's one strategy to think about. Another thing to think about is the location of board meetings. So we know that In many places, they're planning to have rotating locations, so the board will meet in every town. That, I think, helps to alleviate. And then a formal structure, such as a school-based council, I think with a representative of the board as a member of the council serving as a formal vehicle to bring school-based concerns or recommendations to the full board. I mean, those are, I think, probably the best strategies to ensure that there remains a formal connection, good communication, and it's going to take working it through and making sure that people understand what opportunities exist to connect and influence. So I think you guys are on the right track.
Another concern I've heard voiced, and one that I sort of have, is also the complexity of a budget on a new modified district. I mean, for the BUHS vote, very small percentage of the voters show up because they can't follow it. Whereas in our town, the town meeting is big and people sit there and walk through the whole detailed budget item line and really want to understand where the money's going, and I think that is good for the community, and I think that's good for democracy. And so how can we do that? Because I think that's also the concern. It's not just getting in the room and talking about the school, it's really understanding nickel and dime where things are going in the school. It's important to the town. And so how can we do that? Because people don't show up for those district meetings because it's so complex to understand.
Sure, I think a school-based council, and I don't know what the articles say in terms of the role that that council plays in budget development, in terms of making recommendations to the larger board. I mean, when you're talking about a unified district, you're going to have a single budget, so you're not going to have the ability to do nickels and dimes in terms of what's being spent in this classroom, right? But the school-based council can provide a lot of I say insight and influence over what the needs of that school are. And I think it's a matter of helping folks in your community understand the various ways. Coming to town meeting and poring over the budget isn't the only way to stay informed and engaged and provide influence over what's happening in the school district, both in terms of what the costs are, and what you're getting as a result of the investment the public's making. It's just retuning what that involvement and oversight looks like. So it may look different, but it doesn't mean that there's going to be no oversight or
no community involvement.
Right.
So we could specifically add, I mean, we have different things listed in here, but we could specifically have a line saying that they provide budgetary
recommendations.
Now, ultimately, once the budget is established, is to be voted on, what we've seen in practice is, I'll take the high school budget, for example. Some of us in this room have been on that board. When you have the meeting for the budget and it gets finalized, less than 2% of the electorate is there, and it passes annually, which for those of us that's like the high school and think it's good, it's a good thing it passes. But would this change the process, or could we change the process to an Australian ballot where all of the balloting of the towns would be compiled and that would be the outcome of the vote? I mean, that would be the neatest of the process.
Right, yes. And also, keep to the extent that you want to get more involvement, I think that having the community councils be a liaison so that they understand what's going on and are giving information in both directions, receiving information from the community, receiving information from the board, and transferring it will help have more than 2% involved in understanding what's going on.
And when that becomes the opportunity to weigh in on the school district, so a lot of folks really, they're paying attention to.
You hope so.
A lot of community members aren't aware of all the different districts they're actually a member of. And so they believe that by showing up on your annual school district meeting and voting on the budget, that's it. They don't realize there's a supervisory union, there's a union. So I think to the extent folks understand this is it, this is the budget we're voting on, you'll start to see a change in that dynamic. Was there a question over here?
Well, I'm just like, I've been on the BUHS board for a number of years, and I'd just like to make rebuttal to what's been said about the budget development on the BUHS level. I'm a representative from Guilford, and so I think that there are representatives from every member of the district, and they're all working hard to make sure that the budget is as responsible as it can possibly be. And with the administrators and the principals, everybody works together, so it's a collaborative process. The fact that not very many people come to the annual meeting is apathy that can't really be placed on the structure. It's a general sort of a feeling of apathy, I think, that is a little bit lost. That wouldn't be replicated if you had a unified board that was represented by every town. There'd be a lot more feeling of like, I want to be involved. I want to be more involved because this is my local school. So, I mean, I'm an optimist. I think it would work. So, that's all.
If I could make one comment too, just relative to the to a unified system, and maybe Brad might lend a little bit more on this, maybe not. One thing supervisory unions struggle with, which current supervisory districts generally don't, is a standardized data collection for budget development. So, you know, as we were doing the work for the study committee, it takes a long time for a supervisory union to go into 7 different systems, literally different systems with different tax ID numbers that are set up differently. They evolved over time, probably differently. So, and that lends itself to, you know, either non-standard information or just difficulty in gathering and analyzing information. So one thing I'm looking forward to, I know a lot of folks are, the Agency of Education along with the legislature are funding and planning a common chart of accounts, and this is going to coincide with a lot of these mergers. And that process, the chart of accounts that allows us to go into each school and capture educational investments as well as infrastructure and so on, it's going to lend itself to a much more readily available data set for voters and the general public, and in the planning process. It'll facilitate the ability to look at, okay, how are we doing in Dummerston versus Guilford versus you know, Putney, and it could be at a grade level, it could be at a curricular area, a project level. So we're looking forward to that as the business office folks, and I do think that the merged system will not be more complex. It will be much less complex than it is now, and I think that's a misnomer.
And additionally, just to kind of quickly piggyback on that, one thing that supervisory districts don't have supervisory to do is supervisory unions have their own budget that people don't vote on directly. It becomes part of the district's budgets, and you vote on that, but you don't really see it. Whereas if you're a single district, in this case, it's all one number, and everybody sees everything. It does facilitate transparency, and hopefully the chart of accounts will too.
So we have another group coming in 5 minutes. So I'd like to the extent we have time, maybe for one more question, and then wrap it up. I know everyone has the contact information, or can easily get the contact information of all of us up here to the extent you want to follow up on this conversation. I have found it to be very helpful in terms of a better understanding of where folks are at, so that definitely helps whenever I'm responding to questions. So David, last question.
I kind of looked at the clock and anticipated that, and I wanted to, before we stop, just point out that this has been really, really helpful. Lots and lots of information. I think a lot of things are clarified, a lot of things won't be clarified. It could take a long time, but you have a lot of information, a lot of questions, a lot of different things coming at you, and thanks for coming, because it really helps, and don't be discouraged by the responses that or the faces that we make, or the way we don't move our heads.
Critical conversations, and it's so, for me, one of the most exciting things about this is the depth of the conversation that's happening around the state about how do we build a better system for kids and for taxpayers. It doesn't mean they're easy conversations. It doesn't mean that you're not going to hit some bumps along the way, but they're conversations that we can't put off having anymore. And so I really appreciate you spending a good amount of time this morning furthering that conversation.
And I wish we could have had them before the law was passed, and that's for Mike. Mike's been, rather than after, so rather than so.
And when I was down here like 3.5 weeks ago at the, what was it, Velasquez Theater, I think I was, there was the Wyndham County thing. And a lot of people were, I won't say they were railing against Act 46, but they were not supportive of it, and that was fine. And as they were formulating their questions, one of the things they said was that they were having conversations that they would not have had otherwise. And I said, that's really what the Act is really about. It's about having these conversations, seeing where the issues are that you can work with better, get a better education for kids. That's really what it is.
So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll be in touch.